Great. Well, we'll get going. Good evening. I'm Dana Plunkett, Director of Counseling for Needham High School. Thank you for joining us on our financial aid parent evening. Joining me this evening from the department is Aisha Thompson, one of our school counselors. And in a few minutes, after I make a couple remarks, she's going to introduce our panelists this evening from Bentley College. So again, welcome. The school counseling department has really enjoyed over the past several weeks getting to know your juniors as they begin their post-secondary planning process. And we've walked them through sort of how the next 18 months are going to look. And part of that process is sort of the financial aspect of this endeavor for them. So we've enjoyed that time, and we're really looking forward to this evening to help walk you through some of those aspects. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Aisha Thompson, who will continue on with the evening. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Dana. Good evening. My name is Aisha Thomas. I'm one of the school counselors here. We are excited to offer you this financial aid webinar. The financial aid process is a vital part of the college admissions process. As you begin to explore colleges with your student, it is important for you to know how the financial aid process works and what you should be doing to prepare for the financial aid application process. We are grateful to have the financial aid professionals from Bentley University to lead this webinar and to help us learn about the various types of financial aid, what application materials colleges need, and how your financial aid is determined using helpful examples. I would like to introduce you to our experts who are leading the webinar tonight from Bentley University and turning over the program to them. We have James McGehee, Director of Financial Assistance, and Lauren Sullivan, Executive Director of Student Financial Services. They will be leading us through the intricacies of the financial aid process. Just so we do have a chat, so if you have questions, please put your questions in the chat and we will try to answer them at the end closer to the end of the webinar. I'm turning it over to you guys, Lauren and James. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I am also in charge of the slides, so I'm getting control of that. Here we go. As Dana and Aisha kindly introduced us, I'm Lauren Sullivan, the Executive Director of Student Financial Services. I'm just going to kick us off. I'll turn things over to James to go through a bit of the process, how to apply through the FAFSA and the profile. We'll go over a little bit about how need is determined and financial aid options. And as Aisha pointed out, we'll have some time for some Q&A. Just a little housekeeping. We think we will cover a lot as we go through these slides. We have a slide at the end that is going to be a good time to start adding your questions. We'll go over some really common questions, and that way we can cover everything we can and get to the things that are going to pertain to the most people as best as we can. And of course, afterwards, you can always reach out to us if you have additional questions beyond this presentation. All right, so what is financial aid? When we think about financial aid, we're really thinking about three types of things. This includes gift aid, that's grants and scholarships. This is funding that does not need to be paid back. So this is what you're looking for when you're applying for admission, for merit scholarships, and for need-based financial aid through this financial aid application process. There is also federal loans and work opportunities. And within these, you have both need-based and non-need-based. We'll go over that a little bit more later in the presentation. There are various sources of financial aid. These can be from private or local awards, federal, state. There could be outside scholarships that maybe you apply for through your high school. And of course, from institutions themselves that have their own aid, whether it's need-based or merit, that they're able to offer. This slide is just a good demonstration that when you're applying for financial aid, you're applying for everything that's available to you from the universities that you're applying to from every source, although there might be some outside sources that you can apply to separately, which we'll talk about a little bit as well. Going into the how to apply, I am going to turn it over to James.
Everyone, I'm James McGehee. I'm the Director of Financial Assistance at Bentley University. And I'm going to talk about how you actually go through the process of completing a financial aid application. And the first step for anybody who's applying for financial aid is the free application for federal student aid, or the FAFSA. And the most important word in that acronym is free. So you should not pay any money to complete the FAFSA. You shouldn't need anybody to help you do the FAFSA. It is relatively easy these days. You might have heard a few years ago some nightmare stories about FAFSA simplification and delays and how hard it was to get through it. And all of those issues, thankfully, have been resolved. And the FAFSA is easier than ever to complete. There are less questions. There's a lot of skip logic involved in the FAFSA, so you only really answer things that pertain to you and get to skip things if they don't seem to match your circumstances. So should be easy and free and relatively quick. The FAFSA generally is required by all colleges, including for some schools. They may ask you to do it even if you don't think you'll qualify for need-based financial aid. They just want a picture of your family's financial circumstances. In order to complete the FAFSA, you, as a parent and a student, both need to get a studentaid.gov account. It used to be called an FSA ID, and that will be your login for your FAFSA. So you'll want to have that under an email address you're going to keep long term, and you're going to want a password that you can remember because you're going to want to have that each year that your student is in college. So make it something that you'll remember. And when you fill that FAFSA out, the FAFSA now uses a process called the direct data exchange, where it takes information directly from the IRS and takes your tax information and transfers it directly into the FAFSA at the click of a button. It's very easy and simple, and it takes very little time. So it is something that we encourage everyone to do if you're applying for college. All right. When you complete the FAFSA, it's going to ask for some key details. One is the student citizenship status. To complete a FAFSA, a student does have to be either a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident. And then there are a few other categories of eligible non-citizens, but those are a bit rarer. It's going to ask for parent information. One of the most common questions that we get as financial aid administrators is which parent or who do I have to report on the FAFSA? So if your parents are married to each other, easy. You report both parents on the FAFSA. If your parents are unmarried and live together, you report both parents. And then if they're divorced or separated, or they were never married to each other and they don't live together, you would report the parent who provides the majority of your support during the year. If your parent's widowed, of course, you would only report the parent who's still with you. The FAFSA has a great tool, which I've included here on this slide. It's called the Parent Wizard, and it asks 4 quick questions about your family situation. And when you fill that wizard out, it will tell you which parents you need to include on the FAFSA. So it's super easy, and I always encourage people, if you have questions or concerns about who the parent is for the FAFSA, the wizard will help you out and show you who you need to include. And then it's going to ask you about who lives in your household. If that figure is different than who's included on your tax return, you can change that answer on the FAFSA. We always encourage people, have dinner all together as a family, look around the table and count who's there. If it should be you as a student, your parents, any siblings who live in your household, and then anybody else your parents provide more than 50% of their support for. And then the FAFSA is going to ask about income information for both the parent or parents who are contributing to the FAFSA and the student. For students who are juniors in high school currently, when you apply for financial aid, it is going to ask you about 2025 tax information. So at the time you apply, it's about 2 years old that the FAFSA is looking for. It's going to ask you about assets. Assets are reported as of the day that you complete the FAFSA. And the FAFSA is going to ask you about any money that you have in your savings account, checking account, that you have as cash, any non-retirement investments, properties other than your primary residence, and any large businesses. And large businesses would be those that are less than 50% owned by your family or have more than 100 employees. You want to make sure that you don't include the value of your primary residence as an asset on the FAFSA, and you don't include any retirement accounts, life insurance, or small businesses. And small businesses would be ones that the parents own less, or yes, that if the parents own more than 50% or have less than 100 employees, you do not want to include those businesses as assets on your FAFSA. And the FAFSA is not going to ask you about your debt anywhere. So if you have any consumer debt, credit cards, a mortgage, student loans for siblings, it's not going to ask about those figures. The only way that debt is sort of accounted for on the FAFSA is if you have a property other than your primary residence, the value takes into account, the value of the property minus any debt on it. After you submit your FAFSA, you are going to receive a FAFSA submission summary to the email address that you provide. That's going to show you what your student aid index is and give you some more information about next steps. And colleges that you select, and you can select up to 20 on your FAFSA, will receive the information from your FAFSA. If you look at it and you decide, oops, we made some mistakes and we want to make corrections, there's a slight time period where you can't make a correction, but once you're able to, you can log back into studentaid.gov, make any corrections, and then the schools on your FAFSA will receive that correction. If you want to send your FAFSA to more than 20 schools, you will have to send it to the first 20 schools, wait a little bit, submit a correction, take the schools you already sent it to out, and put new schools in. So 20 schools is a lot, so probably not going to be sending it to more than that, but it is always a possibility. And then the other thing I wanted to mention about the FAFSA is that at any given time, there are typically 2 FAFSA years open at the same time. So when you log into studentaid.gov, you just want to make sure that you're doing the FAFSA for the year that you're intending to do it for. Can be a little tricky sometimes. There is a process known as verification where the federal government selects a certain number of FAFSAs every year for some additional information. And so colleges are responsible for completing the verification process. So they may reach out to you and say, we need some additional information. That might be signed tax returns. That might be a worksheet about who lives in your household. They might need your identifications. They might ask you to come in person once you enroll and show them your ID. This is a little bit more rare than it used to be. It used to be a lot of FAFSAs got selected for verification. It's fewer and fewer these days, but it still does happen. And if it does, it's not because you did anything wrong or made any mistakes on your FAFSA. It's just because a certain percentage of those FAFSAs get selected each year for that a little bit of additional scrutiny. You may be thinking, do I have to complete the FAFSA? Is it necessary? And we always encourage all families to apply. It's free. It's pretty easy to do. Some colleges are going to ask you to do it regardless, even if you don't think you'll qualify for need-based aid. And it's the only way to apply for any types of federal financial aid, including the Pell Grant, Teach grants, federal direct loans, and the Parent Plus loan, work study. So if you're interested in any of those programs, you're going to want to make sure that you do a FAFSA and send it to each of the colleges that you're interested in. All right, and then everyone's second favorite form, the CSS profile. The CSS profile is similar to the FAFSA, but it's not required at every college. About 300 colleges nationwide request a CSS profile. Particularly, it's popular among private colleges in New England. So if those are some of your target schools, you may be asked to complete a CSS profile. And it is a College Board product. You complete it at cssprofile.org. It's available each year on October 1st, which is the same time as the FAFSA is available. Unlike the FAFSA, the CSS profile is not free. It is a fee-based service. It's $25 for the first school that you add, and then $16 for each additional school. And the FAFSA, while the FAFSA only asks you about your custodial parent household, a lot of schools who use the CSS profile may also ask you to provide information about your non-custodial parent. So if your parents are divorced or separated, you may be doing two separate profiles, one with the custodial parent household and one with the non-custodial parent household. And the reason why some schools require the CSS profile is because the FAFSA is simplified now. It is very slim. It doesn't ask as many questions. And so the schools who use CSS profile are generally looking to get some additional information about your family's financial circumstances. So it asks questions about your primary residence and the equity that you have in your home. It asks some additional question about income losses, but it also asks about the number in college. The FAFSA a few years ago got rid of that question. It no longer takes into account as part of its formula how many students you have in college at the same time. So you don't get a break on the FAFSA for having two kids in college at once. CSS profile schools generally still give that break to families. So they're looking at asking you that question, who's in college, so that they can get that picture of your family's financial circumstances and give you that sort of break for having multiple children in college at the same time. And generally, CSS profile schools are ones that offer a lot of institutional aid that's directly from their own, pool of money. So they want to look into the family's financial circumstances a little bit more closely than what the FAFSA tells them. For the CSS profile, if your family's income is under $100,000 or you qualified for an SAT fee waiver, you will also qualify for a waiver of the fee to complete the CSS profile. After you submit the CSS profile, you'll receive an acknowledgement email from the College Board letting you know it's been sent out to your colleges. And you have an opportunity to make corrections to the CSS profile one time. So after you've submitted it, if you think something is wrong, you can go in and update it electronically. After that, if you notice any other errors that you'd like to correct, you'll have to contact each school that you sent the profile individually and let them know. Another great thing about the profile that's not listed here is that it has a special circumstances section. So if there is anything going on in your family that's not reflected in the profile, you have an opportunity to write that out and give the financial aid administrators who are looking at your profile a little bit of additional information, some context around your family's circumstances. Hopefully, as you can tell, based on the fact that some schools require a profile and some don't, every school is a little bit different in what they're looking for and how you apply for financial aid. So we encourage you to look closely at every school that you're applying for and see what it is that they're looking for and when they're looking for you to submit that information by. One easy way to kind of keep track of everything is to just create a spreadsheet of each of the colleges that you're applying for, and then the deadline by which they're looking for the FAFSA, the CSS profile, the application. Many schools use the Common App. And then some schools for financial aid are also looking for tax returns. They may be looking for business information. So you want to kind of keep all of that organized and let yourself know when all those deadlines are so you can meet those priority deadlines and receive maximum consideration for financial aid. once you complete a FAFSA and send it to the schools that you're interested in, you're going to be sort of on the radar of their financial aid office. And, hopefully they're going to start sending you reminders. Hey, we have your FAFSA, but we don't have a CSS profile. Or we have your FAFSA and your CSS profile, but we need your tax returns. Send you sort of missing information letters to keep you on track through that process. So it's always a good idea for any schools that you're interested in to go ahead and get that process started as soon as you can when those applications open in October so that they can get you a checklist of things that you need and send you reminders about when those are due.
All right, thanks, James. I'm going to take over from here. And then I think I got the next couple of sections before we go into questions. So I'm just going to go over how, or an introduction to how need is determined. So you might have heard the term student aid index. This is what has essentially taken over from what we used to know as expected family contribution. So if you've already had a student go through this process before, you might still hear financial aid professionals using them interchangeably. It's it's hard to crack your vocabulary when you've been saying something for 15 years. So just know that the student aid index is a term that came to be with the FAFSA simplification. And this is the reason being that it's not so much what your family's able to pay in 1 year, it's the ability of a family to pay over time. So income and asset information is going to be used to calculate the student aid index or the SAI and determine if you're eligible for need-based aid. There's the standard formula, typically the FAFSA, the federal methodology. That's what we're using to determine federal aid. There's also institutional formulas, such as using the CSS profile, as is the case with Bentley and institutions like us. It doesn't make an assumption as to how a family is going to pay, just their ability to pay over time. And the family essentially has a primary responsibility to pay for college to the extent that they are able, and how they do that. We can help guide, but we do not ultimately make that decision for you. And just another reminder that the number of college is no longer a factor in the federal calculation, but it is in the in institutional calculations like places like Bentley. So when we're determining eligibility to determine the student aid index, we're looking at net income and net assets. And so that's federal and state taxes, like reduce the gross income. We're really looking at your federal reported income on both of these applications. Typically, schools are not requesting state tax returns. There's many allowances against income. We know you have to save for retirement. We know that you might have younger siblings that require care and savings towards their future education. So those protections are built into these formulas that are determining eligibility. We're also looking at net assets, which is the net value minus what is owed. Like James mentioned before, we're not looking at credit card debt. That's not something that you can report on these applications. But if you, say, own other real estate property, it is accounting for any debt that's owed against that. If you have a business, it's accounting for the value less any debt of that business. As mentioned before, home equity is not included in the federal calculation, but it would be included in the net assets for many private institutions for their calculation. We get this question a lot. Well, I might have a lot of assets. It really is an income-driven formula. So even though both income and assets are a part of the student aid index calculation, the income does weigh more heavily. So fluctuations in income could be impactful to the calculation. Only about 6% or less of net assets are factoring into the student aid index. And so what that means is that, generally big swings in asset information are not really impacting the calculation year over year, but changes in income for us, particularly over 25%, might be something that could impact future years down the road. And I'll talk a little bit about that during common questions. If you've seen anything like this presentation before, you'll know that this is the baseline financial aid equation. The cost of attendance minus that student aid index or family contribution is going to give you your financial need. So the cost of attendance is not just tuition and fees. This is anything that a student is going to incur during the course of their education, particularly through a standard academic year. Usually we're looking at 9 months, fall and spring, for a standard year. Of course, there's summer, and it just depends on the type of institution that you ultimately enroll in. But all of those costs are going to be included when we're determining your need, because we know that a student needs to finance them throughout the year. So when you take the cost of attendance minus that income and asset calculation, if there's a positive number after that, that means that you have financial need. And that is what schools are looking to fill with any need-based aid that they have available to them. Hopefully this next slide kind of gives an idea about how that equation works. So when we talk about sticker price, we're talking about that cost of attendance that is listed on every institution's website, right? So just because an institution has a higher sticker price does not mean that that is the ultimate price a family is going to pay. That calculation is sort of demonstrated here in the basic level. Say a private institution might have a sticker price of $75,000, but your student aid index should remain pretty consistent across institutions, depending on the type of institution, right? But you can just see as an example roughly how need increases as the cost of attendance increases because your family contribution remains relatively the same. So various institutions just have more room for need to to award aid towards. Kind of think of it like a bucket. So you're filling a bucket with the family contribution plus any aid that's available to you up to a student's need level. All right, I'm going to go through some financial aid options. Like I mentioned previously in the earlier slides, the three types of aid we're really looking at are gift aid, federal loans, and funds from work. So focusing a little bit on gift aid, we're really talking about scholarships and grants. So scholarships might be awarded through the admission process based on merit. Various schools are going to have different requirements. For our school, you simply need to apply for admission for the most part to be considered for merit scholarship during the admission process. But other institutions might have additional requirements, perhaps additional essays, or you need to check a box on their application. You also want to be mindful if you are awarded a scholarship during this process, what are the requirements for renewal in future years? Generally, merit scholarships do not require that you demonstrate need. They're renewable year after year, and they will have their own requirements, typically grade point average or full-time enrollment, things of that nature. Grants are typically need-based. It's based on an annual snapshot of family income and assets. That's what that student aid index or SAI is. Generally, you need to complete a FAFSA each year. I expect that most institutions are requiring at least that because that is going to be your application for your federal aid, including loans, which we will go over. But reapplication for your institution might require multiple items be submitted. So for our example, we collect the FAFSA, the profile taxes, a lot of information in year one, but we really try to only collect FAFSA and taxes in years 2, 3, and 4, right? So everyone's going to have a different renewal process as well. If your school requires the profile, like I said, it might not be required every year, or it might. So you just want to ask these questions while you're going through the whole process. I want to go back to this one quickly. I don't know if we covered this before, but at the very beginning of the presentation, we had all of those little bubbles. So these scholarships and grants can come from the institution, but they're also you're being considered for the federal that you might be eligible for, state that you might be eligible for. If there's outside sources, that's something that's a little bit separate, and we will talk about that. When we're talking about loan funding, there are various loans that are out there, and there might be some state loans that some students are eligible for, but we're generally talking about federal direct loans. And your FAFSA is the application for those. These do not require a credit check. They are available to students as a sole borrower. There's a subsidized and unsubsidized component. What that means is that when we talked about need-based versus non-need-based, subsidized loans are need-based loans. This is because the interest is being paid by the government while students are in school. It will accrue after graduation, but while a student is in school, the interest is not accruing, the government is paying for it. So that's a need-based loan. Unsubsidized, the interest is going to be accruing the whole time. Students will get quarterly interest statements, which they can pay, or they can choose to let the interest build, and it will capitalize on the principal at the end when they graduate. We always encourage students to reduce their borrowing if they don't need it, but these are low interest options for students who are looking to help finance their education. And if you are able and are borrowing all of these, try to pay the interest while you're in school to minimize what you owe at the end, if possible. Again, there's no payments required while enrolled, but you have the option. And the interest rate is going to be fixed for the life of the loan. Every year, the government announces what the interest rates are, usually, I want to say in June. And that will be the interest rate for the loan until it's repaid. There are annual limits for these loans for first-year students. That's $5,500, of which $3,500 can be subsidized. $6,500 for year 2, of which $4,500 can be subsidized, and $7,500 for years 3 and 4, of which $5,500 can be subsidized. Of course, how it's broken up per student is going to be dependent on that need-based calculation and if they have the eligibility for subsidized versus unsubsidized loans. We get a lot of questions about student employment. Excuse me. So this is what we're talking about when we're talking about earned financial aid. We're really talking about the Federal Work Study Program. So it's a need-based work program that is really focused typically on high-need students, but essentially it's dependent on the institution and their allotment that they have. So you might be awarded work study at one institution, but not at another. So that's not because necessarily there's no need. It just depends on what institutions have in terms of their total financial aid they can offer to students. So don't worry if you've got it at one, you can always request to see if you have the eligibility at various institutions. That's something that might be flexible. The award process might differ between schools, as will the job application process. It's basically the school has a flexibility of how to award and how students get jobs. Many schools also have a non-need based employment program. So you also don't need to fret if maybe work study wasn't in your award. There still might be jobs available on campus. There are on ours, as I know. We will prioritize students who have work study as a part of their financial aid award as the highest need. And we open up jobs a little bit later in the semester, and particularly in the spring with students leaving and for study abroad programs and such. The minimum wage in Massachusetts is $15 an hour, and we typically expect students to work about 10 hours a week with a maximum of 20 hours a week. These are earnings that are paid, and they do not go towards the tuition or the bill. So these are really funds that are helping students defray their personal expenses or save for books in a future term. Of course, if they're working in a semester and they're saving their funds to go towards tuition in a future semester, that is also something that they're able to do. Oh, we're already at common questions. So that went through that a little quick. So obviously happy to repeat anything that might have been gone through a little too fast or go back a few slides. I'm going to go through a few things that are most commonly asked, but you can obviously start putting stuff into the chat. We will field those as well. And then James, if I call on you, that's because I need your help to answer questions. So give me a sec. Oh, this is one we get all the time. Should I wait until I'm admitted before applying for aid? Generally, generally the financial aid process goes hand in hand with the admission process. By the time we drop admission decisions, we want to also be giving you a financial aid award, right? So we would say, look at those deadlines, have your deadline tracker, get everything in timely. There are institutions that are going to have priority deadlines that you need to meet in order to qualify for financial aid. You don't want to inadvertently put yourself out of financial aid eligibility, not because you don't have the need, but because you didn't meet a deadline. So those are really important. We also get some questions about what it means to be need blind or institutions that meet full need. These numbers are sort of rough out there. There are lists of institutions that have this information on various sites out there. There are going to be institutions that are need blind, meaning they're not looking at your need when they're looking at your admission application, or there's going to be institutions that meet full need, and there's going to be about 36 institutions that have a crossover there. So you might want to just do a little research to determine which of these schools has which, and just be mindful that getting your application in on time might impact at various institutions some element of admission. Some are like need aware, where maybe when they're going to the wait list, that's something that they're looking at. Every institution is going to be different. Another just point to make is that a family's definition of need is often different than the actual calculation. So when we're saying the term need, obviously that is just part of our formula. It is not in any way saying that you don't need this. It's just the terminology that we use. Anything on this that I missed, James? I think I covered everything.
I think that's all the basics.
Okay. All right. This is our next most commonly asked question, which is how does an outside scholarship affect a financial aid package? Each school can treat outside scholarships differently. It can't be used to replace your student aid index, the family contribution. It would be on top of that. If you think about it like the bucket, as I mentioned, the first thing that goes into that bucket is the family contribution. And then it can be filled with every other source of financial assistance up to your need level or up to the cost of attendance, depending on your circumstances. Outside scholarships can be used to meet unmet need. And what we mean by unmet need is if we take that cost of attendance, we subtract the family contribution, and then that need is filled with as much aid as possible from from the institutions that you've applied to. They might only be able to meet a portion of it, and there might be some left that was unmet, just depending on a university's budget. So outside scholarships can be a really good tool or resource to meet any kind of unmet need there. It can be used to replace loans, which we refer to as self-help, or work study if you were just trying to maximize the amount of scholarship or grant that you're getting. It's really important to ask each institution how they treat these outside scholarships if you're expecting them, because they might treat them very differently. We try to maximize and put them on top of the award that we've put out there, our grants and scholarships, but some institutions, depending on their budget or if they're meeting full need already, may require that it replace need-based grants that they've already offered in an award letter. So be very clear about each institution, how they treat outside scholarships. I think this is an example. This is an old one. We don't get this question as much. I think it's sort of a commonly known thing, but people do often ask, should I take out a home equity loan to pay for college? It's very much up to you. We don't make any determination of how you choose to finance. It's sort of depending on what your rates you're getting compared to maybe your traditional educational loan, if that is something else that you're looking for. But this is just a nice example of how families might use past income, present income, and future income to pay for school. And what we mean by that is there anything that you have in savings that can go in sort of bulk towards your bill? Can a family use something like a payment plan if an institution offers it to spread payments out and more effectively finance throughout the year versus just paying in batch? And future income, what can you reasonably pay over time? And that might be through a private educational loan or a home equity loan. So you might have some summer savings, maybe the parents have some savings or a 529 plan that they're going to be using. And then they're going to use a little bit out of a payment plan spread over, say, 4 to 5 payments per term. And that will ultimately help you finance. It doesn't have to be all of one thing or all of another. It can be a combination of financing options. And I encourage everyone to look into payment plans and various other payment options through all the institutions they're looking at. This has been the time-old example of how much student loan debt is reasonable. Typically, they say, what's the annual starting salary compared to student loan debt? This is definitely something that's just been said for many, many years, but ultimately, I encourage families to look at a budget, look at that last example that we had and say, what can we all combined as a family reasonably pay in a given year, and what can we take on in terms of financial burden over time? All right. Does applying early decision affect financial aid? This is going to be dependent on institutions, but there are benefits to both. So some institutions might have a stronger inclination towards their early decision pools. And I think the thing to focus on is more why apply or why not apply. And there's also important questions to ask institutions, like if you apply for early decision and it is not financially feasible for you to go based on the financial aid you've gotten, is there any way for you to be released from that binding decision? Early Decision 1 and 2 are binding programs, and you might not have the ability to receive other awards because of that, but it can be broken. In some cases, make sure you're asking the institutions before you apply, if it's just simply unaffordable. I would always encourage students that if you are applying ED to a school, before you just ultimately say, oh no, I can't do it, have a conversation with your financial aid office to see if there's any way to make it affordable for you, or if, especially if there's been a change in circumstances. So another benefit of applying early decision is peace of mind. If you really know where you want to go and you want to be done with your decision making and you get a financial aid award that is affordable to you, excellent. If you're more the type that really wants to weigh their options, that regular decision might be a better benefit for you. So you can take all of your options, lay them out side by side, do those calculations, and ultimately say, what's the best return on my investment for what I'm getting and what I'm going to pay. All right, we have some resources, and we'll get to your questions in the chat. The FAFSA.gov, that's where you're going to go and find the FAFSA. It really is at studentaid.gov, and there's a lot of information there about federal aid, about applying for federal aid. And if you're having trouble completing the FAFSA, they have a hotline that you can contact. Like James said, it has been much simplified and it is generally pretty quick, but there are sometimes complications and you need guidance through that. Because it's a third-party application, they would be able to guide you. Additionally, going to the College Board if you have any issues completing the CSS profile. I'll actually mention here as well with collecting documents. The College Board has what's called the iDoc, where you can upload tax documents, and not every institution is going to use that. So make sure that you know where to also upload documents when you're applying to institutions, and who's collecting what from where. It can get very complicated, and making that spreadsheet, like James said, could be really useful. MIFA, the Massachusetts Education Financing Authority, is a really good resource for just general information. They also have a really good college cost calculator, a side-by-side tool that you can use to say, what's going to be my bottom line here? What's my net price? They also have very good financial aid presentations in Spanish, if anyone is looking for that. They put on a lot of financial aid presentations themselves. They're a really good resource out there for how to finance your education. And then I always encourage students to look at the college scorecard. This is a government site where there's no information that's really spun by institutions, and you can really dig into some stuff here to do some comparison to really determine on your return on investment. It will give you net prices, it will get you graduation rates, retention rates. You can even drill into various programs at various institutions and get a side-by-side comparison of what those institutions have to offer, and starting salaries, things like that. So if you have any questions, there are various sources here. And then, of course, any questions that you have for us now, we are happy to answer. I can't see the chat, so I'm trying to find it. I don't know if there's anything in there yet. Let me look.
Yeah, it's actually in the Q&A. And so other folks, I'll read one from the Q&A and remind folks that this is being recorded, and this in the slide deck will be available on the high school counseling webpage probably in a couple days. So that's come up a couple times. But for future questions, if people want to put them in the chat, but I've got one in the Q&A right now, question is, which circumstances or professions at this point will wipe out the federal loans so that you don't have to repay? For example, Peace, AmeriCorps, some education and or social work jobs.
Goodness, James, do you have that offhand? It's been a while since I've had that question. It's a great question.
Yeah, that's a great question. The federal government still offers what's known as public service loan forgiveness for people who work in government and nonprofits. You do have to make 10 years of repayments on those loans before you qualify for the forgiveness. So it's not an automatically wiped out as soon as you graduate situation. And it's important to note that those programs can sort of shift with the political winds. So, that used to be a bit more expansive. The current administration is trying to pull back on that some. So, I would say it's something you probably don't want to necessarily count on. And if it is still in place at the time that you qualify for it, more the better. So Peace Corps and AmeriCorps, I think both qualify under public service loan forgiveness, but you do have to first make those 10 years of repayments. There's also the Teach Grant, which is a grant for students who are go into the teaching profession in high demand fields. Not all schools participate in that, so you have to be at an eligible school. And it's a grant for people who successfully go into the field and meet the requirements of serving for a number of years in those teaching positions. And if you don't complete the requirements, you drop out of the teaching profession, then it is converted to a loan and has to be repaid. So there's not a lot of those programs available at this point.
Great, thank you. We have another question. If custody and costs are shared 50-50 between divorced parents, who fills out the FAFSA? Additionally, is each parent's financial information private from the other during the application process?
That's a great question. So James had mentioned the parent wizard that the FAFSA has out there. That is the 4 questions that's the best to ask. I believe, and James, correct me if I'm wrong, that generally if you're saying that costs are shared 50-50, it is likely that the higher earner would be reported on the FAFSA. Yep, I can see him shaking his head. Yes. Each parent's financial information is private during the process. So the FAFSA is only collecting one, right? And institutions, financial aid counselors, we are well versed in these types of situations. We understand that privacy is really important. So on the CSS profile, if you're filling out like a household A, household B, custodial, non-custodial, it is separate. You're not going to be able to see each other's. We will be able to see everything. And when we counsel students, we keep that information essentially private, because we're not going to say, oh yeah, they have this. Ultimately it's up to a parent if they want to share the information with a student. The FAFSA is owned by the student, so they can go in and see what's on the FAFSA. Like, that is the student's application. The CSS profile is owned by the student. But yeah, we are very, very cognizant that this information is sensitive.
Great. Another question is, what type of income is considered in the calculation? Just employment income, or is income from retirement accounts considered?
Oh, that's a great question. So all total income is typically looked at, and it's going to differ between federal and institutional methodology, how much information is collected. But retirement, if you're putting money into a bona fide retirement account, like, we're not looking at anything that's in a retirement account, but the application does ask, at least the CSS profile, about any tax deferred pension and saving, anything that would be in your W-2 box 12 of certain codes, right? So it's a specific question that's asking that. Whether an institution is including it is institutional methodology. So it could vary, and a lot of this information would be proprietary of whether or not they're including it, but families are reporting it on the application. But once it's in a bona fide retirement account, it is completely ignored. The questions that are being asked are also going to pertain to untaxed income, untaxed interest, anything. If you're receiving Social Security benefits, that might be asked on the profile, but not the FAFSA. And some institutions might be looking more deeply into things like business income and paper losses, so it's generally positive income, I would say, that most institutions are considering from institution methodology, and federal methodology is going to be just straight up what's on your tax returns.
Great. Is there a resource or site to find external sources of scholarships? I'll let you start that, and then Aisha and I can answer from the high school's perspective.
There are national websites. There's FastWeb, scholarships and grants.us. There's any number of sites. Keep in mind with those, Usually you create a profile and it tries to match you towards relevant scholarships. But these are our national search engines. So you are probably competing against a relatively large pool of applicants for a lot of these scholarships. So we also encourage you, and this might be something that Dana and Aisha are going to tell you, to look more locally. So look in your community. Your parents' employers might have scholarships, your church or civic organizations, local businesses. So those are always options, as well as those big scholarship search engine sites.
I will also say that local banks sometimes, like if you have a bank, sometimes they have scholarships as well. So that's a great place to look. And we also, for Needham High School, we do offer local scholarships. And so that usually takes place during senior year, either between February and March. So your child will receive information about how to apply for local scholarships and what they need to do to apply for it, and if there's any additional recommendations or things that they need to do in regards to it.
We also have a spreadsheet with a QR code that students can access. So any scholarship that comes across our desk, which again is not a comprehensive list, but we add those to that list so students can always see what we're hearing about as well. So again, there's numerous places that they can check for all of those scholarships.
And one last thing I will say too, in our Google Classrooms, I still have a Google Classroom. So in my Google Classroom, I also list a lot of scholarships for students to look at as well.
Yeah.
So
a final question, is foreign income also being taken into account that this is stocks from other countries?
Yes, so you're reporting all income on these applications. We have families that have both US tax returns and foreign tax returns. We sometimes get a question how to report the foreign tax return income or just foreign income in general, because the FAFSA and the CSS profile are built based on how you have report US tax returns. You simply need to convert any non-US currency into US currency and report it in the line that you think best fits that. And I'll say, if you are afraid that you've made a mistake or you're reporting something wrong, contact any financial aid counselor. You're answering these questions to the best of your ability, and it is our job to determine if there's anything that needs clarification or correction and follow up with you. So I think people fret that they're reporting something on a federal application, but that is what we are here for. We are here to answer those questions and make sure that we're getting everything right.
thank you, Lauren and James. Um, I just want to, and Lauren, I know you have always extended, like if people had any additional questions or things like that, you guys have always given your email and information for people to reach out. And I know that we also you guys have access to MIFA as well, which you have brought that up. And so on behalf of the Needham High School Counseling Department, we'd like to extend a heartfelt thanks to Lauren and James for always helping us and being the expertise with us tonight. Your insight has undoubtedly enriched our understanding of this process, and we are truly grateful for your time and commitment. I know this is a busy season for you guys right now, and you guys always take the time out of your schedule to kind of help us and be here for our families and for the counselors as well. So I want to thank everyone for coming tonight, and I hope that you guys have a great rest of your evening.
Thanks for having us.